My name is Bob. My name is Bob Heidela, and I am with the National Center on Subsidy Innovation and Accountability. I oversee the Program Integrity and Accountability Unit here, and those folks are going to be your presenters. We are also presenting this on behalf and in conjunction with the Office of Child Care. The team that's presenting today will be Program Integrity Lead SME Subject Matter Expert Janae Williams, Program Integrity Subject Matter Expert Tamara Schmidt, and Program Integrity Subject Matter Expert Mike McKenzie. That is the team from NPIAW that will be presenting the webinar for you today. Also with us is the Office of Child Care. And with us today, we have from the Division of Oversight and Accountability, Adi Fatur and Penny Job. Adi?
Thanks, Bob. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedules to join us today. I would like to just quickly welcome everyone on behalf of the Office of Child Care to the second webinar of our 2024 National Program Integrity Series. Like Bob said, my name's Adi Fatur, and I'm part of OCC's Oversight and Accountability Division. And just looking in the chat, gosh, we're so lucky we've had a chance to work with a lot of folks on this call. You might know members of my team through monitoring or through the CCDF and proper payments review. So we know firsthand that you all are a very committed group and very dedicated to ensuring CCDF program integrity. So you're in the right place. And we've been offering these webinars for several years as part of our ongoing work to help states, territories, and tribes strengthen their program integrity and accountability efforts and to minimize the risk of waste, fraud, and abuse. So in today's webinar, we're going to be sharing some strategies and considerations for the effective use of written agreements in your CCDF programs. And we're also excited to welcome some of your peers from the Utah Department of Workforce Services to share their experiences with written agreements in their CCDF program. I think we've heard loud and clear from you all that people really want to hear from others doing the work on the ground. So we're really appreciative for states that are willing to come on and help us learn from your experiences. So if you have ideas about future topics for these webinars, feel free to put them in the chat today, or you can always let your regional office know and they'll make sure we get the information. Thanks again for all the work you do to support children, families, and the ECE workforce. And I will turn it back to Bob to review the agenda and get us started.
Thanks, Adi. Okay, so for the agenda, what we're going to be doing today is what is a written agreement. Important to know that as we talk about written agreements today, we're talking about them through a program integrity lens. Some of the things that you're going to hear about are some of the new rule payment options, including grants or contracts. And our state presenter, Utah, is going to kind of talk about their experience as well. This is not a training on those. This is not a policy discussion around those different rule requirements. They're just being mentioned as a part of the written agreement conversation. So contracts are a type of written agreement, which we're going to talk about and how they relate as people start thinking about the different ways that they're going to be doing these different payment options. We're going to talk about why do lead agencies need the written agreements, what kinds of services might a lead agency delegate, what should be included in the written agreement, the lead agency's role, the state presentation again, as Adi said, is going to be the state of Utah. And then we're going to wrap that up. Any questions and kind of go over next steps if there are any. So the next thing is our logistics for Zoom. So this is a Zoom platform. I think way at the top of the chat is going to be an email. Beth Holmes is with us today, and she's going to be handling any technical difficulties. So if you've had to call in because you got booted out or you have any other issues with the Zoom platform, please reach out to her by email and she can help with that. Also, this is an interactive session or could have the possibility for interaction. So you can either do that through the chat or you can do that by raising your hand. And again, in Zoom on the bottom, typically there's an ellipsis on the bottom that says more. So if you're not seeing the chat or you're not seeing the raise hand option, usually if you click that ellipsis, you'll be able to find both of those tools in the webinar to use. Again, you might also see Q&A. We are not using that. So if you are looking to ask a question or you're looking to contact us, just use the chat option and we'll make sure we monitor that and get back to you. It is a fairly large group. So if we don't get your question answered today, we'll certainly reach out. So as you ask a question, put your name and the agency in there so that we can make sure we get back to you with any information that we need to as far as your questions go. And I think the registration should be taken care of. And I think that takes care of all the logistics with Zoom. Looking forward to it. Again, I appreciate all of you joining us today, and I hope you're able to get something out of our webinar. With that, I am going to turn it over to Mike McKenzie to get us started.
All right, thanks for setting the table, Bob. And we're going to start out by briefly discussing what written agreements are and where to find the guidance in federal regs for this topic. So what is a written agreement? You know, it's common for CCDF lead agencies to delegate some programmatic and administrative functions to another entity through a written agreement. A written agreement could be a contract or a memorandum of understanding, and it can be used with subrecipients, contractors, and partners. And a couple other examples are your TANF agency, or possibly even an entity that does your overpayment collections. CFR 45 section 98.11 is where you can find the main guidance on written agreements. And we give you a tidbit of some of the citation here. The thing to remember is that you've got broad authority to administer the program through other agencies. And ultimately, and this is important, the buck stops with the lead agency. So you can delegate some of these functions to other agencies, but ultimately the lead agency is still the one responsible for the program. Procurement can be a big piece of this, and procurement and budget staff can really be instrumental to the success of completing any type of procurement. And so fostering a good relationship with these staff can also help you understand what they require to help you out. Okay, why do we need written agreements? That's the next piece we're going to cover here. As I said before, the CCDF agency has broad authority to administer the program through other government or non-government agencies. You can contract with nonprofit agencies such as school readiness coalitions, resource and referral agencies, or even workforce boards. You can contract with other entities, including county governments or other state agencies, or as I mentioned before, even TANF agencies. But ultimately, even when you contract with another department or office in the state, it's important to remember that the lead agency retains the responsibility for compliance with all CCDF requirements. Now, as Bob mentioned before, there's a piece of this that's related to the new rule, and it's around grants or contracts. The 2024 Child Care and Development Fund final rule requires lead agencies to use some grants or contracts for direct services toward child care for children in underserved geographic areas, infants and toddlers, and kids with disabilities. There can be a real benefit to this, including more childcare options for families, which we always want to offer, and the idea of more stabilized payments for providers. So real benefit to this. And as Bob said, this is not a training on grants or contracts, but more on written agreements, and grants or contracts are an example of written agreements that agencies can use. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Janae Williams to cover the next component here. Janae?
All right, thanks, Mike. So in this next section, what we'll discuss is what might a lead agency delegate under these written agreements. as we move through this particular section of the presentation, there will be some polls and discussion questions. The purpose of the polls and the discussion questions is for you guys to engage. We know from doing these webinars that you all like to hear what other agencies are doing across the country. So this is our way of setting a platform so that you guys can have those conversations and see what other agencies are doing. But for written agreements, the delegations. So lead agencies delegate various tasks and outsource services for many reasons. A few reasons include and are not limited to leveraging specialized expertise, enhancing efficiency, and or extending their capacity to manage their CCDF program. Now, in this section, we'll discuss the types of services or tasks an agency might delegate and the role of the written agreement. So examples of delegated tasks or contract services include, as Mike discussed earlier, a lead agency having a TANF or another agency assist them with eligibility determinations, the use of an accounting agency to manage provider payments to ensure financial compliance, or the use of another private company for fraud investigation services to ensure compliance with program integrity requirements at 9868. Partnerships like these and more help the lead agency enhance their efficiency and maintain accountability within their CCDF program. So we will start with our first poll of delegate. So in a moment here, a poll will appear on your screen, and we ask that you guys answer these questions. The first question being, which tasks or services are presently assigned to an external entity within your agency? And you have some options there. And if you don't delegate or outsource, you'll just say not applicable. If it's other, you check other, and we ask that if you would kindly place that in the chat box. And then the second question, does your agency maintain written agreements for all of the delegated tasks and or services? So we'll give you guys about a minute to answer these questions, and we will share the results. And again, this is strictly for informational purposes only. It's for other agency staff that are attending the call that would like to know, hey, what services are other agencies delegating? Do they have written agreements? Right. And we're at about 58 participation. So we'll give you guys a few more seconds here. And if you don't know the answer to the second question, just click I don't know. Maybe that's a task for you when you finish the webinar. Hey, do we have written agreements for all of our delegated services and tasks? All right, so it seems like we're holding at 61%. So we'll go ahead and end the poll and share the results. And of those who responded, it looks like about 50% delegate their eligibility determinations. We have agencies that are using external partners for fraud investigations and other. I'm hoping you guys put that other response in the chat box. And about 75% of those who answered say, yeah, we have written agreements in place. And that is truly awesome. And if you don't know, hey, find out. All right, so let's keep moving to the next presentation, next part of this section. So why do written agreements matter? Written agreements are required for any task or services delegated to an external partner by the lead agency under CCDF. Written agreements play a crucial role in clearly defining roles, responsibilities, and expectations. They contribute to maintaining clarity and ensuring compliance with the federal and state regulations. In addition, these agreements establish accountability by setting measurable criteria for performance evaluation and ensuring that all parties adhere to the program standards. So in this example for grants and contracts, written agreements are the foundation for directing resources as they clearly outline goals and expected outcomes. They ensure alignment with the strategic objectives, such as prioritizing underserved populations, while also providing a roadmap for accountability and transparency to ensure that the resources are used effectively and appropriately. So let's try another poll here in reference to grants and contracts. Since it is part of the final rule, I'm sure a lot of agencies would like to know how other agencies are using grants and contracts, if they are, for childcare slots. So if you could answer these two questions. Has your agency established grants or contracts to support the availability of childcare slots? And what are the objectives of these childcare slots? And again, if you don't know, just check I don't know. And if your agency has a different objective than the ones listed, we'd like for you to share. And we'll give you guys about a minute to answer this poll. Well, it looks like, give it a few more seconds here. A couple more people responding. All right, so it looks like we're holding it. Well, nope, we had some more come in. All right, so let's close the poll and look at the results. All right, so it looks like of those who answered, 57% have established grants and contracts to support the availability of childcare slots. And of those, we'll say about 33%, the objective here is to serve underserved areas, actually infant and toddler care takes the lead here. And there were some responses too with other. If you guys don't mind, definitely put that other objective in the chat box. And thank you for sharing. All right, so let's move to a discussion question. In the chat box, and you can feel free to type your answer in the chat box or raise your hand, and we can definitely call on you, and you can come off mute if you just like to, vocally say what your agency does. But if you would be so kind and answer the following questions. How does the delegation of tasks or services enhance overall program integrity and efficiency? And that's thinking about some of the information that we just provided on the slides. And how can a lead agency enhance its effectiveness in utilizing written agreements to improve accountability and program outcomes? So again, if you guys could type your response in the chat box or raise your hand, and we will recognize you to come off mute. And we'll give you guys a few minutes to kind of think about that. And again, how does the delegation of tasks or services enhance the overall program integrity and efficiency? We have Laura Frame. She indicates we do not currently have childcare slots or partners. However, we are considering partnering one day and thought this webinar would be helpful information. So my poll answers are not applicable. Well, thank you, Laura, for that. All right, so it doesn't seem like we're getting too many responses. Yeah.
I thought I saw a hand up and then went down, so I'm not sure if Renee still wants to come off mute. But she did have her hand raised.
Well, definitely, Renee, we'd definitely love to hear your thoughts. Do you want to come off mute?
Thank you. In reference to the second question,
Yes, ma'am.
we use service level agreements to enhance effectiveness for our program. So we have a vendor that completes all of our child care scholarship authorizations, and they complete our payment processing. And our contract has a lot of service level agreements. And what a service level agreement is, it's just a detailed aspect of a contract that tells the vendor exactly what you expect.
Nice.
And we have 25 service level agreements that basically move the paperwork from the time you receive it to the time you complete payment processing. For example, if a person submits an application and they submit all documents, our vendor has 5 days to issue the child care subsidy to the parent. And in reference to emails that come in, the vendor has 1 day to respond to emails. And that's just an example. Thank you.
That is a great example. Thank you for that, Renee. And you guys are, where are you from, Renee?
Maryland.
Maryland. That was a great example. Anyone else want to come off mute? All right, looks like we do have a response from Tabitha in the chat. We partner with our agency that makes referrals for children with IFSPs, so we're able to meet, and something's covering meeting the 10% disability requirements annually. Thank you for that, Tabitha. All right, so we will move to the next section of this presentation, which is what should be included in a written agreement. So in this section, we'll provide an overview of the key elements that a lead agency must include in their written agreements. It is essential that written agreements clearly outline the roles, the tasks, and the responsibilities of the involved parties. Ms. Renee Williams provided us a great example of that. And this content and the content of these agreements is vital because it ensures the agency complies with federal and state regulations, and it also helps the agency effectively manage responsibilities and promote accountability. So let's start off with what's required in the written agreements. So in written agreements, it's required that agencies clearly define the mutual roles and responsibilities. And I know that you guys have heard me say that a few times on this webinar because it is important and it's required of both the lead agency and the contracted entity. This includes specifying the task to be performed, setting a detailed timeline for the task completion, and ensuring that the budget aligns with the federal regulations at 9865H. Additionally, the agency must identify clear indicators or measures to assess performance, ensuring accountability and effective program management. Now, we'll discuss a strategy for this next, but I do want to reiterate that the requirements and more information regarding written agreements can be found in the federal regulations at 9811. So
Janae, I just want to mention that I feel like a lot of those components that you just mentioned are the same ones that Renee mentioned in her example.
They were.
So I thought that was pretty cool.
It was. Thank you for that, Mike.
Yeah.
All right, so for the indicators and measures. So your indicators and measures ensure that the delegated tasks are completed efficiently and effectively. So one strategy an agency can use to meet this requirement is the utilization of key performance indicators in their written agreements. So key performance indicators, or KPIs, are the performance metrics such as meeting reporting deadlines, timeliness, the accuracy of reports, the use of resources, and or the effectiveness of the external partners' fraud prevention strategies. Metrics like these can support the agency's effort in maintaining high standards and fostering continuous improvement. Now, agencies should also consider monitoring the outcomes associated with these KPIs. This can be achieved through regular reporting, site visits, and real-time data monitoring. This will help ensure tasks are carried out efficiently. And again, as Mike pointed out, Renee from Maryland provided us a great example of that. Monitoring KPIs can also provide a framework for accountability and future decision-making. So if you guys would like, you can also respond in the chat. What key performance indicators does your agency currently utilize, and how effective have they proven to be? So key performance indicators currently used. So I believe, Ms. Renee, you indicated the vendor had 5 days to make a payment to the family. Is that correct?
If
That
if the applicant submits a complete application, yes.
So what is the performance? So the performance indicator would be that vendor not releasing that payment after all of the requirements were met within a time frame, correct?
Correct.
What would be, how effective has that proven to be, having that particular measurable outcome within your agreement?
I think it's effective because there's money associated with it. There's a penalty associated with it, so that inspires them to comply.
Nice. Thank you. Awesome. So in this last section, what we'll talk about are additional provisions. So
Janae?
obviously you want to check with your legal department, as it may be advisable to incorporate additional provisions into your agreements. Provisions such as ensuring compliance with federal and state regulations, a provision that outlines dispute resolution procedures, provisions that safeguard the confidentiality of sensitive information, as well as provisions to define termination clauses for concluding the agreement if necessary. But definitely check with your legal department to see what types of provisions can be added to your written agreement. Ms. Renee pointed out that there's a penalty. There's a financial penalty for not meeting the performance or the requirements within the agreement that they have with their vendor.
Janae, I'd just like to go back to the performance indicators as well in our chat.
Sure, thank you.
Carrie from Vermont says that they use quarterly reports of error rate, which must be below 5%. Site visits performed by our grant monitors and case assessment to determine areas where improvement or additional training is needed.
Oh, thank you for that. And that was Carrie. Thank you, Carrie, for sharing.
You are welcome.
Nice. All right. So I do believe we have one last poll and discussion question before I turn it over to my colleague, Ms. Tamara. And that poll will appear shortly. It's just one question. Do your current written agreements encompass additional provisions? I know that there are a few, right? And if you don't know, you simply check I don't know. And with these provisions, have you guys encountered any challenges with implementing the provisions or even enforcing them? Or are there some provisions that your agency used that we haven't discussed? And I see, and we'll give you guys a few minutes to answer that. And I also see that there is a reply from a Deborah. She indicated that California contracts with over 500 agencies to provide childcare services to children and families. We also contract with agencies throughout California, resource and referral services. We monitor the agency using the program integrity tool. Ooh, that sounds nice. All right, so it looks like participation in the poll has ceased. So we can go ahead and end the poll. And it looks like about 35% of the individuals that answer do have provisions in their written agreements, and some of you don't know. So again, that may be a conversation with your leadership team and your legal department. So I would like to thank you guys for your participation. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Tamara. Tamara?
Thank you. Yep, thank you, Janae. It does look like there's some more comments in the chat. I'm not sure if we want to go back to that.
Do you want to read the next? What's
Yep.
next? Yep, if you don't mind.
So, Dory, we have had issues getting back copies of certified payroll reports from some contracted vendors.
So you have had issues getting back copies. So have you, Dory, do you want to share what steps you guys are taking to try and mitigate that challenge?
Sure, yeah. Hi, I'm Dory Tupwan with Telstart Incorporated. We have contacted the owners of the company when the HR departments and their payroll departments do not respond back. We've written certified letters that we had mailed out to the agency as well, so that we have our documentations that show that we've been, requesting these items. And then we also list a complaint with the Department of Industrial Relations. And then if we are not successful with receiving the certified payrolls, after all of that is said and done, then we put them on the red list of vendors we are no longer able to contract with.
Perfect, nice. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
That was good information. And
It
it looks like
looks-
our tool, Deborah shared her tool with you guys. That is so awesome. Thank you for that, Deborah. Okay, Tamara. Sorry. It's all you now. Thank you guys for your participation.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to talk a little bit about lead agencies' roles. So what is the lead agency's roles? Lead agencies have the broad authority to enter into written agreements or contracts with other entities, which we've mentioned before in the presentation. However, the lead agency is ultimately responsible for the administration of the CCDF, which includes ensuring subgrantee and contractor compliance with things such as CCDF regulations, the approved CCDF plan, and provisions of the written agreement or contract. I think a good example of this as a part of meeting the CCDF requirements is that lead agencies use other entities to complete part of the eligibility process. We'll use a written agreement to ensure access to needed documents when reviewing sample cases pulled during the error rate review. That's just one example. There's many. So why, let's see. Why is monitoring compliance important? So you have accountability, and accountability ensures that all parties involved are held accountable for their obligations. This helps maintain transparency and trust in how funds are utilized, supporting the overall integrity of the CCDF program. Risk identification. Regular monitoring allows lead agencies to identify potential risks, such as non-compliance or financial irregularities early on. Maintaining compliance ensures that the agency and its partners remain compliant with all applicable laws, regulations, and policies. And continuous improvement. Effective monitoring provides valuable data and insights that can be used to improve program policies and practices. So what are the implications of not monitoring? Increased risk of fraud and abuse. The lack of monitoring can lead to fraudulent claims by providers, incorrect billing, or payment for services not rendered, all of which undermine the program's integrity. Non-compliance with federal and state regulations can potentially result in penalties, loss of funding, or the need for corrective actions. Additionally, public trust may be impacted. As some of you may have seen, there have been news stories that have come out regarding child care and fraudulent activities. These types of stories can negatively impact the public perception of the program, which is not a great thing for any agency. Financial losses due to unauthorized expenditures, budget mismanagement, and financial inefficiencies. An increased administrative burden if issues arise from unmonitored agreements. Resolving these issues can often require considerable time and resources from various people. So what type of written agreements or contracts you have in place will help determine what monitoring and internal control strategies you implement. Some internal control strategies to consider for written agreements with another entity to administer the subsidy program may include segregation of duties to ensure no single individual can initiate, authorize, and complete a transaction without independent checks and balances. Supervisory reviews, requiring implementation and reporting of monthly supervisory reviews at the subgrantee level with an identified error rate threshold. Policy and procedure approval, lead agency approval of subgrantee policies or procedures to administer the subsidy program to ensure compliance with state and federal rules. And on-site monitoring or desk audits of eligibility activities such as eligibility and interviews and eligibility determinations. What are some internal control considerations for written agreements with providers for childcare slots? Some of these may include provider reporting requirements, establishing provider reporting requirements for things such as attendance or vacant slot thresholds, and then randomly auditing those records. Automated red flag reports to monitor child attendance when attendance tracking systems are in place. And implement performance measures. Are the goals of the contract being met, such as increasing slots for certain populations of children? Or do adjustments need to be made to make it more effective and financially viable? So now we'd like to give you all an opportunity to share with the group what internal control strategies you have implemented to monitor written agreements or contracts. I think you can always come off mute, but please, you can always type in the chat as well and share some insight with your colleagues. And I know some of you have some kind of examples to offer. So please feel free to put those in the chat or please come off mute and share.
Hello, this is Deborah from California. In addition to monitoring agencies on sort of a cycle every couple years, we also require a self-evaluation of all the same elements from our monitoring tools. So agencies have to do sort of a self-assessment each year and submit that to the department. So it is a way for us to kind of check in with agencies, what additional sort of supports they need, if they are struggling to meet something or be in compliance with something. So that's one internal control process that we use.
Thank you so much for sharing. We do have a question here in the chat from Carrie O'Halloran. I would love to hear what other states are tracking on their red flag reports. Do we have anybody that can come off mute and talk about that or put a response in the chat?
I actually think that's a great question.
Yeah.
For the written agreements, are there any states that are utilizing some sort of red flag or system alert to monitor the written agreement they have with another agency or even with their agreements with their providers?
I think a couple of examples I can offer from past experience might be some attendance tracking red flag reports. So, for example, if a child is attending multiple providers, you can put in place a red flag report to alert you to attendance anomalies. Maybe the child was marked in at both providers or whatever that may look like, or even monitoring absences. You can put in place red flag reports to monitor a child's absenteeism if it's part of like a contract or slots contract. So those are a couple examples. I know there's got to be other folks on the call that have great things to offer, so don't be shy.
What about
Yes.
agencies who mark that they use other agencies for eligibility determinations? Are there any red flag reports that you guys utilize in-house to monitor those outside agencies? Yeah, see, Autumn put in outside of provider hours. Outside of provider hours, sorry, of operation.
It's a great example.
And I can just add too, just kind of thinking about this from a perspective, you know, it really comes down to what you put in your written agreements, right? How you build that out and what you put in there as far as those performance indicators and how you build your red flags. So as we look at, you know, delinking attendance and saying these absences maybe not something that we need to look at as in a singular case, maybe you have a threshold for how many absences is underutilization. So maybe you put a red flag report together that has underutilization. So Junior just put into the chat there, Wisconsin's child mobility, payment grouping, provider overcapacity, unusual revenue growth, unusual payment timing, are some of the things that Wisconsin looks at. So again, it kind of how you put your agreements together will kind of dictate what you could report out on and find those red flags about.
There are some great examples. Amber Allen, we do random employment verifications quarterly. We have disclosure agreements with our applications that are mandatory. Thank you, Amber. I think as anybody thinks of other things that they might want to share, please feel free to keep typing in the chat. And we appreciate your engagement. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ann Stocka-Mahia, the Child Care Subsidy Program Manager for the Utah Department of Workforce Services, to talk to us a little bit about written agreements they might have in place. Thank you, Ann.
Tamara. First of all, I just kind of want to put this in context and give you some background about Utah. We are state administered, and we administer our eligibility determinations for all public assistance programs in-house. We do have contracts in place, as you're talking. We have contracts in place with 6 childcare resource and referral agencies to assist parents in finding childcare and to support our providers. We also have an MOU in place with childcare licensing because that's in a separate state department. And we work closely with them to help us ensure that CCDF requirements are being met for our providers. And when we do those types of contracts, we have a formal process that our department goes through to ensure that those written agreements have outcomes and that we are monitoring them. We have different risk levels that are assessed, that we determine if it's a high risk, medium risk, low risk. And then depending on that, we have guidance on how frequently we monitor those or how we monitor those. We do not have any contracts in place for grants with providers right now for the childcare slots. That's something that we are looking at to see how we are going to implement that. But I was asked to speak today specifically about pay by enrollment and prospective eligibility and what types of agreements we have in place for that. And so it's a little bit different than the conversation so far. But I want to share with you what we do, because we've gotten that question a few times. So we used to pay, as many of you know, Utah has paid prospectively. We paid parents directly for many years. And then in 2016, we switched to payment to provider. And so we developed a provider portal for providers to access their subsidy payment information and to report changes to the agency, such as a child is no longer attending or they're not going to be attending the following month. When they report those changes in our portal, that automatically reads to our eligibility payment system, and our eligibility workers get a task regarding that change that's being reported. And it also can stop the benefits from going out if the parents reported a new provider or something like that. We've always paid prospectively, whether it's paid by parent, paid to the parent or to the provider. And we do pay based on enrollment. We have a minimum 8-hour monthly attendance requirement to establish ongoing childcare need. We also have a childcare provider helpline to assist providers with payment questions. We do a lot of provider education through the helpline, and we wanted to create a document that was comprehensive, that answered a lot of those frequently asked questions and gave an overview of the program. So back when we switched to payment to provider, we developed a provider guide. And at the end of the guide, there were terms and conditions that the providers were required to agree to at the end of that document. And so that was how we felt that it was important that they needed to sign something if they were going to accept those subsidy payments, that they understood what that meant and what their responsibilities were if they weren't reporting changes to us correctly or were not eligible for those funds. So that's kind of the background. So now I'm going to go through these 4 questions that are on your screen. As far as who was involved in creating the written agreements. So our office drafted the document. We call it our provider guide, to make sure that it met our business needs and accurately reflected our policies. And then we had our terms and conditions reviewed by our legal team to make sure that they aligned with our administrative rules and that it used the correct legal terminology to hold providers accountable if they didn't follow through with what they were supposed to in terms of accepting the subsidy payment. In one of our earlier iterations, we included our internal auditors in the process to review the terms and conditions to make sure that the language included requirements that they wanted to see in terms of cooperation with auditors or investigators and keeping and sharing accurate attendance records with them. For which entities did you develop written agreements? So again, this is specific to childcare providers that receive subsidy payments. and these are for all provider types. They all sign the same terms and conditions. The terms and conditions do specify if it's a requirement specific to a licensed family provider or licensed center provider. We do have more stringent requirements for them just because they receive a high percentage of our federal funding. But all providers that want to accept subsidy are required to enter into that agreement by signing the terms and conditions. As far as any monitoring measures or controls that we've put into place, I mentioned earlier that childcare licensing is in a different state agency, but we do have an MOU with them. One of the things that we've put in place with them through our MOU process is that whenever they have a new provider that they're going out to do that initial inspection and they've got their monitoring or they've got their checklist with them to make sure that they're meeting all the requirements. One of the questions on there is, have they read and signed the terms and conditions of the DWS or Department of Workforce Services provider guide to be able to accept subsidy payments? So they inform them they email that to them in advance, and then on the day of the visit, they ask them if they want to accept subsidy and if they've read the terms and conditions, and then if they have, then they go ahead and they sign that agreement electronically. And then that document is uploaded into their system, which our department does have access to through our agreement. And then we are able to access that signed record at any time. Additionally, there are terms when providers sign into our portal that the providers are required to agree to just because of the sensitive nature of the information and of their responsibilities to report changes. So one of those conditions is that every time they log in, they understand that they are once again agreeing to those terms and conditions of the provider guide and that they understand what their rights and responsibilities are. And anytime there is a new revision to the guide, we give the providers 30 days advance notice that the guide has been updated, a summary of what those changes are. And then when they log into the portal the next time, they are agreeing that they will follow those conditions. The terms, just so to kind of give you an example, some of the things that are include just reporting changes to the department timely, whether it's a child no longer attending or a rate change, their direct deposit account might be changed, so they need to update that timely so that they can get paid. Using an approved electronic attendance system, keeping and self-certifying. So we also have a certification process in place. And so not only are they required to report changes timely, but we require them to go into our portal a minimum of once a month and self-certify that they have looked at all of their cases, all of their children in care that receive subsidy, and reported known changes at that time. If providers don't adhere to the terms, we can request an investigation or an internal audit may be conducted. Sometimes our internal auditors will audit an individual provider, or they might have a whole list of providers where they're doing a big audit at one time, where they're looking for specific items that they're in compliance with. We can also take remedial measures such as increased monitoring of a provider to ensure that they are compliant. It's kind of like a corrective action plan where we're making sure that they are going to follow through with something. So like, for example, if they are not using an approved electronic attendance system that we've asked, that's a requirement now within the last year, we can put them on a corrective action plan. We don't call it that, but that's essentially what it is. And give them an opportunity to cooperate, or we can terminate them we can move to a disqualification if they don't want to adhere to our requirements. And then on the eligibility side, you know, we have QC that's done monthly, whether it's an on cycle year or not. We always have QC going. We also have performance reviews done at the supervisor level on a monthly basis as well, which is just another level of QC to make sure that our staff are processing cases correctly and taking action on any changes that are known to the agency that we can act on. Of course, now with the 12-month eligibility, we don't have to act on everything. As far as what lessons were learned, specific to this terms and conditions, it's actually a really smooth process that we've implemented because it's all done electronically. We send a mass email to all providers with a link or a copy to the provider guide so that they have access to that electronically. And then, like I said, every time they log into the portal, they're agreeing to that. It's been very helpful to have our attorneys review our guide and particularly the terms and conditions to make sure that they are in line with our administrative rules, or if we're changing something to identify if our administrative rules need to be changed as well. And so it is very good to involve them when we're making these types of changes. And then provider education is key to all of this because, you know, how many times do we get things where we're accepting things and not really reading what we're accepting, right? And so we want to make sure that the providers really do understand what they are agreeing to when they sign the guide. And so we have ongoing training for providers. We have once a month, we have like kind of an open house meeting where any providers can get on a call with our staff and just ask questions, but it's really more geared towards new providers that aren't familiar with the subsidy program. And it explains what our expectations are, but it's also an opportunity for Q&A for any providers that are that have a burning question that they want to talk to somebody face to face, and we can do that. We also hold webinars whenever we have substantial changes to our policy, and we record those webinars so the providers aren't available to attend. We try to hold them in the evenings, but they're recorded so that they can watch them at their convenience at any time. So we take lots of opportunities to be proactive when communicating with our providers, whether it's by phone or email or in person, to make sure they understand those responsibilities and are following through with those. So I guess I'll turn it back over to Tamara or to Mike.
I'm trying to click on my video to get going again here, Ann. Thank you so much for providing that information. You guys have really done a lot in terms of making sure the providers are aware of their roles and responsibilities. I think that's great. I love the concept of, what did you call it, an open house once a month for
Right.
providers? And, you know, I kind of think of like office hours, you know, so anybody can call in and whether it's a new or a seasoned provider, they can still get the answers that they need. I think that's a great idea. So we are going to just kind of open it up for general questions and open discussion. So if anybody has any questions for Ann, this is your opportunity to check in with her. Again, as a couple of my colleagues mentioned earlier, I think the best info comes from your peers. So again, thank you very much, Ann, for sharing this information today. And let's open it up and see if anybody has any other questions. And again, you can enter your question in the chat or come off mute and just ask Ann or anybody else yourself. All right, I don't know if you can see this, Ann, but it says, how does Utah handle provider changes mid-month? So both providers get full payment for the child?
That's a really great question. We, as you know, we can't pay the same, we can't pay two providers for the same benefit for the same month. So if the first provider has not received the full payment that we allocate per child, if there's any money left over, we can pay that second provider. It's usually not very much, but that is an option. But if they're actually reporting a change from one provider to another provider, we inform the parents up front that a change reported 1 month is made effective the following month. And so they would need to work out some type of an arrangement with their second provider until we can pay them for the upcoming month. Now, we do have a few exceptions to that. Sometimes, we do pay by enrollment, but if the first provider voluntarily wants to return money to the state, they can do so. We don't tell them they can't. And so that money could then be applied to that second provider. And also if there's a situation where they don't really have a choice because maybe they've moved to the opposite end of the state, or their schedule has changed, or their provider's schedule has changed, and it's just they really don't have another option. Maybe there's an endangerment situation, then we will allow that double payment, but we have a limited amount of state general fund that we're able to use to be able to do that.
Good question, Elisa. Thank you for that.
And could I ask a follow-up to that? Just, do you cover kind of that piece of it in the provider education piece? So as far as that they know that if someone is going to change mid-month, but there might be a shortage of payment?
Yes, we do. It's in our provider guide. I don't think it's in the terms and conditions, but we do mention it in our provider guide.
Thank you.
And that way they know that if they're that second provider, most likely they're not going to get paid until the first of the next month, and they've got to work out those payment arrangements privately with the parent ahead of time.
And I don't know if it was your state, but one of the states that Stam was talking about how they have a separate policy if the provider kicks the kid out. I'm not coming up with the word right now. Versus if the parent initiates the change. Do you take that into account at all either?
If the provider terminates care, we make the provider pay us back. I don't know if that's allowable or not, but that's how we handle provider terminations, unless it's an endangerment situation and they can, they have a compelling reason as far as what happened. But what we don't want to have happen is that a provider waits until the first day of the month, they get paid, and then they kick the child out. We feel like that's an abuse of funding. And so that's why we have in our terms and conditions that if they terminate the care, that it's their responsibility, that they will have an overpayment and they need to pay the state back. And then we will be able to pay another provider for that parent to go to that same month.
Thanks, Laura. And in the meantime, we did have just a question, and you answered this before, Ann, but somebody asked if Utah pays prospectively, and Heather Thomas replied and said, yes, you do. Any other questions for Ann or for anybody else? Ann, I just have one question for you. I know you said you have not started trying to implement grants or contracts for slots. Any idea when Utah is planning on trying to do that?
We're requesting a waiver for that.
Okay.
we have a few ideas, but it might take a year or two to put that into motion.
Sure, sure. Good luck with that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? Any other questions?
Mike, I have one follow-up question for Ann regarding the terms and conditions, right? Did Utah allow providers to provide feedback on any of the terms and conditions, or did Utah use some sort of board or any other type of administrative technique to get feedback on the terms and conditions before they were finalized?
That's a good question. I would say probably not on the actual document, but on the individual policies that are in the terms and conditions. Those are also our administrative rules, or most of them are in our rules. And so that we do have a rulemaking process that gives the opportunity for public comment. We also have an advisory board where we take our policy changes and present those to our board, and many of those are providers that sit on that board. And so we do have that opportunity to review those things with them. In fact, we have made some changes as a result of those conversations. For example, with our attendance system requirements, we were going to make it mandatory that all providers use our system. And when we presented that to our advisory board, and after much discussion, we backed down on that and said, okay, you need to use an electronic system that is approved by our department. It doesn't have to be a single one that we've designed. And so we do involve our, whenever we make substantial changes to our policy or to our rules that affect providers, we involve them in that process so that they have the opportunity for comment.
Thank you.
Great example. Thank you.
Welcome.
All right, guys, any other questions for Ann or for anybody else?
I do. I'm going to keep Ann on the hot spot here.
Okay.
So regarding appeals, so having a very clear and concise and terms and conditions and having those signatures and being reviewed on a regular basis, do you find that it helps with your appeal process?
Yes, it does. I mean, we've got, because we have all that documentation.
Yeah.
And not just the written agreement, but every time, we can print out, through our portal, we can print out how many times they were in the portal, how many times did they report changes. It establishes a pattern. So if we see that there's like a pattern of misuse, or a pattern of not reporting or never going into the portal, that builds our case as well.
Thank you.
Mike, so looks like there's one.
Yep, it looks like Renee Williams had one more request, and she asked if you have a link to your rules. I really like Utah's terms for providers that end care. Do you have anything you could share?
As far as I can share the link to our administrative rules. Sure.
Great. We'll make sure you and Renee get connected.
Okay.
Any other questions?
If you can pop that link in the chat, I also would like it.
Is there a way for you to do that, Ann?
Yeah.
Same for Vermont too. Thank you.
Okay.
Just want to hold on a second here.
Sure. You do that, we'll take you off the hot seat. And I'll just do a couple things as we wrap up here and let Ann do that. So as we wrap up today's webinar, first of all, I want to thank you all for attending. I know how busy you all are. We all know how busy you are. So thank you for taking the time out of your day to attend this webinar. Just to make the case for technical assistance, if you need any technical assistance related to program integrity, We have listed the contact information for everybody. For myself, I cover regions 1, 3, and 8. Janae Williams covers regions 2, 5, 7, and 10. And Tamara Schmidt covers regions 4, 6, and 9. Of course, we want you to go through your regional office first, but we have our contact info there if you ever want to chat about anything. And for future topics for these webinars, we get our best ideas from you folks. So feel free, if you have any idea on future webinar topics, to just send an email to one of us and make the suggestion, and we'll see if we can make it happen. Anne, thank you for participating today, and thank you for inserting that link to the rules in the chat for those folks that wanted that. Really
You're welcome.
appreciate it. And with that, I'm going to say thank you. Have a great afternoon. We're going to get done a little bit early today, but it's always better to get done a little early than to get done a little late, right? So enjoy the rest of your afternoon, guys. Thank you so much for participating today.